A nurse was fired after kneeling and praying for a patient in the hospital, but what happened next left everyone in shock. A nurse knelt beside an unnamed patient and prayed. The next day, she was fired. But the real miracle began right then and there. You'll soon hear the first words spoken by that patient upon waking, and to learn the confession that changed everything. Stay with us until the end. Lucy pushed open the hospital door slowly, as if she were carrying the whole world on her shoulders. The cold light of the hallway did not match the darkness she felt inside. It had been exactly 1 year since she had lost her son Matteo, 22 years old. A motorcycle, rain, an intersection, and a silence that never went away. Each step to the dressing room felt heavier than the last. The sound of her shoes echoed loudly on the clean floor, but in her head, all she could hear was Matteo's last laugh a week before he left. He had visited her in the hospital. He brought her coffee as usual. He sat on the same bench as always and said with a laugh, "Mom, you take care of everyone, but who takes care of you?" Lucy opened the locker slowly, the uniform hanging as always, the smell of the band mixed with the alcohol from the hospital. Inside, at the back of the locker, was a small laminated photo. Matteo, still a child, smiling with 2 missing teeth, the same one she carried with her every shift. She ran her fingers slowly over the image, as if she were really touching his little face. "One more day, my love," she whispered. She sat down on the wooden bench and carefully put on her white cap, as if it were part of a ritual. The clock read 6:47, exactly the time when the phone rang a year ago with the worst news of her life. The world moved on. Her colleagues at the hospital were already laughing, joking, living other stages of life. But Lucy was stuck in time. She could still hear his footsteps running down the hall. She took a deep breath, got up, closed the locker, but left the photo in plain sight. She made the sign of the cross with her right hand and left. The hallway was already crowded. Doctors walking quickly, nurses talking about patients, machines making noises. Everything normal, everything the same. But inside her, everything was empty. On the wall, near the emergency room, there was a new sign. Humanization in Care Week. Lucy paused for a moment. She smiled a little. Irony or warning? She put on her mask, adjusted her badge on her chest, and walked toward the observation room. She knew the day would be long, like all the others. But today she just wanted to get through the day without breaking down. Because no matter how much time passes, the pain of losing a child never goes away. It always stays on call inside your chest, silently waiting for any moment to come out. The hospital radio blared loudly in the hallway, and the nervous voice of a nursing technician broke the silence. Emergency, code red, serious accident, hit and run. Lucy had barely finished tying her gown. Her heart leapt. She closed her eyes for a second as if asking for calm, and ran down the hallway. The bright lights, the sound of instruments, the hurried footsteps. Everything was faster. The stretcher was pushed in by 2 paramedics, carrying an unconscious man with a bruised face and torn shirt. One of the paramedics spoke quickly as he checked the monitor. A man around 35 years old was hit by a car while trying to pull a child out of the street. "The child is fine. We don't know about him. He has no documents or identification." Lucy approached and looked directly at the man's face. Time stood still. She felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet for a moment. The dark hair, the shape of the face. For a second, the image of Matteo appeared in her mind. She swallowed hard, but continued. She couldn't stop. "Let's stabilize him now," she shouted. "Blood pressure, pulse, oxygen. Come on, team." The other nurses rushed over. Gloves, IV, monitor, mask. The man wasn't responding. His breathing was weak. His forehead was ice cold. Lucy grabbed his wrist with both hands, her fingers cold. She could barely feel his pulse, but it was there, weak. "But he's here," she whispered softly, her mouth close to his ear. "Don't go now, you hear me? You did something good. You saved a child. Now someone has to take care of you, too." While the doctor assessed him, Lucy adjusted the sheet under the patient. She removed the glass stuck to his clothes. Her gown was already stained red, but she didn't even notice. She just wanted that man to hold on. "Where is his family?" asked the technician next to her. Lucy shook her head. I don't know, but for now, he has us. The minutes passed slowly. They took the man to bed 12 in the observation room. Lucy stayed by his side, watching the monitor, checking his vital signs, changing his IV, but above all, she looked at him as one looks at someone who needs to come back, who needs to remember that there is still life, because even though she didn't know who he was, she felt something, a strong need not to let this stranger go, as if it were an opportunity to prevent another mother from feeling the same pain she had felt, if only for a moment. Lucy entered the observation room with the file in her hand. The morning light streamed in through the large windows, making everything look clearer than she wanted it to. It was still early, but that room already bore the weight of the entire night. The patient in bed 12 was there, intubated, with pale skin, bandages on his face, and an IV bag hanging beside him. She approached slowly, as if entering a place where time had stopped. When she got close, she looked more closely. She stopped. Her body froze. It took a second for her eyes to understand what they were seeing, but then the memory came. The injured face. Yes, the stitches on the forehead, but it was the shape of the jaw, the type of hair, the color of the skin, the shape of the lips. A frightening resemblance. For a moment, her heart forgot where it was. She took a step back. Matteo whispered softly, unintentionally, but it wasn't. It couldn't be. She knew it, but her body trembled anyway. Her hands, which were always steady, began to shake. She almost dropped the file. The air felt heavier. The sounds around her became distant, as if the world had fallen silent for a second. She sat down on the chair next to the bed and covered her face with her hands. She wanted to take a deep breath, but she felt the air stuck in her throat. Tears began to fall, but she didn't let them. She blinked rapidly and breathed heavily. She had to calm down. She had to take care of him. She reached out and touched his arm very gently. His skin was cold, his pulse weak, but there, his eyes were closed, but there was a peace in that sleeping face, a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. You're not him, I know, she said in a low voice, almost a whisper, but you look so much like him. So much she lowered her head, her eyes fixed on the man's hands. If only you could hear me. If only you knew how many nights I spent asking for just one more chance to hold my son, to hold his hand. Silence was his answer. Lucy closed her eyes for a moment, trying to push that feeling away, but she couldn't. It wasn't just because of him, it was because of everything she carried, because of the pain she had nowhere to put, because of the sadness that remained stuck in her chest, because of the guilt that, even though it made no sense, never went away. She got up slowly, straightened the boy's blanket, carefully smoothed his hair, did everything she used to do with Matteo when he was sick. The gesture was natural, an instinct, a mother's love that never ceased to exist, even though she no longer had anyone to give it to. You're going to be okay. You hear me? She said softly. I'm here. She knew her shift would be long, but at that moment, something changed. He was no longer just another patient. It was no longer just another morning. It was as if God had brought a stranger with a familiar face to tell her, there is still love inside you, and you can still give it. The room was silent. All that could be heard was the sound of the monitor marking the rhythm of his heart, and the soft murmur of the IV dripping down the tube. Bed 12 had always been one of the most forgotten. It was in a corner of the observation room, far from the door and the comings and goings, far from the noise. But for her at that moment, it was the most important place in the entire hospital. She went to the supervisor, her voice still broken, but her gaze firm. I want to stay with him, this patient. I can take care of him. The other nurse, who already knew the pain Lucy carried inside, asked no questions, just nodded her head. Sure, Lucy, the shift is yours. She returned to bed 12 with a decision in her heart. It was as if she were caring for someone in her family, as if it were her own child lying there. She pulled the blanket down to his waist and, with all the care in the world, adjusted his hospital gown, which was on crookedly. She checked his IV, changed the tape, and looked to see if he had any wounds they hadn't seen. It wasn't just her job. It was something more. She sat down in the chair next to him and took his hand. It was a large hand with calluses, strong fingers, but now without strength. I don't know who you are or where you come from, but you're not going to be alone here. Do you hear me? No one is going to leave you alone, she said firmly, but with a trembling voice, and squeezed his hand as if she wanted to pass on life to him, as if with that touch she was saying that there was someone there who cared, that if he came back, someone would be waiting for him. From time to time, she would get up, adjust the monitor, check his heartbeat, make notes in his file, but she always returned to her chair. She always came back to hold his hand. At one point, as she looked at his face, she was surprised to find herself smiling. It was strange to smile in the midst of so much pain, but there was something about that silence that brought peace, something in that room that reminded him of the love he had, that he had lost, and that somehow he could still give. A technician entered the room and, seeing Lucy so focused, commented in a low voice, "He seems lucky to have you." Lucy replied without turning around, her eyes still fixed on the boy. "We are lucky when we can take care of someone." And she stayed there without rushing. She spoke slowly, in a low voice, almost as if she were telling a secret. Sometimes she would start with simple things like, "It's hot today, isn't it?" Or, "You should see how beautiful the sky is outside." But soon the conversation took on another tone, another depth. "I had a son, you know," she would say, looking at the ceiling, as if it were easier to see the white surface than to remember Matteo's face. "A beautiful boy. His name was Matteo, my treasure." She would sigh, move his sheets, adjust the blanket. He was very clumsy, always knocking over glasses. Every week I had to buy a new one, but even so, I missed him when he wasn't home. I even missed the noise. Now the silence is what breaks everything inside. And she looked at him. She looked for some sign, a movement of his fingers, a blink, anything, but his face remained calm, motionless. Only his chest rose and fell slowly. "You remind me so much of him. Sometimes it's hard not to think that God sent you." The days passed, and with each shift she returned to the same place. And sometimes her voice would break. She would pause. She would be silent for a while, but she wouldn't leave. She would stay there with her hand on his, the touch soft, without force, but full of presence. "I don't know your name, but to me you are already part of the family." One day she brought a small rosary, wrapped it around the headboard, and left it hanging there. It's not to force you to do anything. It's just to remind you that someone is praying for you, even if you don't know it. Over time, what was just care turned into affection. What was affection turned into a bond. She knew the sound of his breathing. She knew when his heart rate changed. She noticed when his skin warmed or when his face grew paler. "You're listening to me, right?" she would ask in a soft voice. "I feel like you are." It was a conversation from soul to soul, from a broken woman to a man in pieces. And there, in that quiet room, far from everyone else, a true connection was forming. Words were not necessary. His presence was enough. The silence was enough. That gentle touch of his hand was enough. 3 whole days passed, and he was still lying there in bed, 12, without opening his eyes, without saying a single word, without a moan, without a strong movement. Lucy looked at the sign on the wall where the patient's details should be. Name, age, family contact, but it only said patient 9, as if he were just another number, as if he weren't someone with a history, with a past, with someone waiting for him somewhere. She felt that someone must be looking for him. A mother, a father, a child, maybe a friend. Someone somewhere in the world. Their heart must be aching, not knowing where he was. And that hurt her in a way she couldn't explain, because she knew what it was like to wait for a call that never came. She knew what it was like to sit on the edge of the bed every night, waiting for news. Someone ran their fingers carefully across his forehead, wiping away the sweat. Then they took the stethoscope, listened to his heart, which was slow but strong. There was still life, and as long as there was life, she wasn't going to give up. 3 days, and no one has come for you, she said in a low voice, almost like a lament. This isn't right. You're obviously a good person. It can't be that you have no one, a neighbor, a co-worker, anyone. She looked at his face again, trying to imagine what he looked like when he smiled. Maybe he had dimples. Maybe he laughed loudly or told silly jokes. Who knows? But now he was just silence. And Lucy couldn't accept that he was just that. She started asking questions during her shift. She spoke to the guards, the receptionist, the ambulance crew who brought him in. No one knew anything. He had no cell phone in his pocket, no ID, no wallet, just his battered body, and that story about how he had saved a little girl from being run over. She walked down the hospital corridor, tired, her eyes sunken, but she returned to the room. She grabbed an old notebook and wrote at the top of the page, "Bed 12, patient no," and there she began to write down everything he ate through the tube, how he reacted to music, when he moved his fingers, the color of his face. She wanted to record everything, because even though no one else knew who he was, she knew he was someone. That night, she brought a prayer candle and lit it next to the bed by the window. "As long as no one comes, I'll stay here until you remember where you come from, or until someone remembers that they love you." She sat back down in the chair, crossed her arms, and leaned her head against the wall, her eyes filled with tears, but steady. She wasn't going to leave. The early morning hours passed slowly, like an old man walking with short steps. The dim light from the hallway barely filtered through the crack in the door. The hospital slept in silence, broken only by the sounds of the monitors and the air conditioning blowing a constant cold breeze. Lucy was there again, sitting next to bed 12. Her back hurt. Her eyes were heavy, but she wasn't leaving. Some people said it was useless, that he was unconscious, that he might not come back. But Lucy didn't think so. She believed that somehow he could hear her, and so in the early hours of the morning, as on the 2 previous nights, she spoke to him. "Look, if you can hear me, I know it's hard in there, but don't give up. Yes, there's someone out here with you." She bowed her head for a moment and closed her eyes. Exhaustion was taking its toll. Suddenly, a small movement made her heart race. She opened her eyes and looked at his hand. His fingers were moving slowly, a slight tremor, almost imperceptible, but real. She jumped up, almost tripping over her own foot. She moved closer, her eyes wide open. Her heart was beating fast, as if her own body was reacting. "Did you move your hand?" she said, her voice breaking, her chest tight with emotion. She held his hand with both of hers, as if it were the greatest treasure in the world. "You're there, right? Can you hear me? It's me, Lucy. I've been here since day one. You're not alone." And then a tear rolled down the corner of his eye. Just one, slow, silent, but to her it was as if he had screamed. Lucy brought her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back the tears. That tear was everything. It was an answer. It was life saying, "I'm still here." It was then that she squeezed his hand tighter, leaned forward, and said with a trembling voice, "Take it easy. You don't have to rush. Just keep fighting, because I'll be here watching over you, supporting you, praying until you really come back." She stayed there for a long time, feeling his warm hand in hers, as if it were the most important bond in the world. The next day, Lucy slept little, as usual, but woke up with her heart racing, a feeling she couldn't explain. She got on the bus in silence with the rosary rolled up in her hand, and her eyes fixed on the window, but her mind was far away. When she entered the observation room, his room was the same. She pulled up a chair and sat down next to the bed, as she did every day. She looked at him fondly. His fingers were firmer now, still, but not as cold as before. Lucy reached into the pocket of her robe and took out her cell phone. She stared at the screen for a few seconds, until she opened the music gallery, and then stopped at that song, Matteo's favorite. She placed the cell phone next to the bed, very close to the pillow, and pressed play. The melody filled the room, soft, familiar, full of nostalgia. It was as if, at that moment, the past had returned a little, as if Matteo were there again, sitting on the couch, tapping his knee to the beat, singing softly. Lucy closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. The sound of the music broke the silence like a warm embrace, and then she looked at the monitor. His heart rate had stabilized. His heart, which had been beating slowly and unevenly, was now following a steady, strong, lively rhythm. Lucy opened her eyes in surprise. She looked at his face. Nothing had changed in his expression, but something inside her told her. He listened. "You heard it, right?" she whispered with a trembling voice. "This song is special to me. It was my child's, and now it's yours too." She brought her hand to her face, covering her mouth as she tried to hold back her emotions. It was a simple gesture, but it broke all the hospital rules. No noise, no cell phones, no interference. But she didn't care, because at that moment she wasn't just a nurse. She was a mother. She was a woman. She was someone trying to give life to another person. She stood there listening with him, singing softly, almost like a prayer. If this makes your heart remember how beautiful it is to be here, then I'll play this song 1,000 times. Did you hear me? And she knew. She knew that in that room, at that moment, something connected between the two of them. Something that no medicine could provide. Something that only love could do. It would be the end of another long shift. But Lucy didn't want to leave. She couldn't. That bed, that room, it was as if they were calling her, as if they were already part of who she was. Now she slowly got up from the chair, still holding his hand in hers, and with a slow, almost shy gesture, she knelt right there, next to the bed. Her knees touched the cold floor, her tired body bent forward, and with her forehead lowered, she began to pray. "God," she whispered, "you know me. Do you know how hard I've tried to carry on? Do you know the void that has been left inside me since Matteo left?" Her voice broke, but she didn't stop. It was as if each word came out with the weight of a memory. "I know that everything has its time, that we have no control over anything, but I beg you, mother to father, don't take him too. No, he's just a boy now. He has his whole life ahead of him. There must be people out there waiting for him. Someone who loves him, a mother perhaps like me, who must now be heartbroken without even knowing where he is." She squeezed his hand tighter. A tear fell on the white sheet, and then another, and another. He saved a child. My God. He threw himself in front of a car. People who do that are good people, people with good hearts, just like my son, just like Matteo. That's why I'm here, because even though I don't know his name, I already love him as if he were my own. Silence answered, but not an empty silence. It was a silence full of presence, a silence that seemed to listen. She continued now with a trembling voice, as if speaking to the sky, looking into its eyes. "If it is your will, take care of him, heal him. And if it is not, if he has to go, then stay with him. Please, don't let him go alone." Lucy stayed there a little longer, her hand still holding his, tears running down her tired face, her heart tight but surrendered. It was a prayer that broke protocol, that ignored hospital rules, that didn't care what others thought, because at that moment, she was just a woman truly asking for a life she didn't even know, but which she already carried in her heart. And there, kneeling on the cold floor, her face looking up, Lucy gave herself over as never before, and the entire room seemed to fill with something sacred, as if heaven, though silent, were listening. She didn't notice how much time passed like this. Her body already ached, her knees marked by the hard floor, but she didn't feel it. She only felt the warmth of that hand, the sound of his breathing, and her own heart beating slowly, as if it wanted to accompany his. What Lucy didn't know was that outside, the hallway of the observation room was beginning to stir. It was shift change, nurses walking, doctors arriving, visitors entering with badges around their necks. And there, in that glass display case where you could see every bed, every patient, Lucy was kneeling, her body bent over, her face moved, her lips still moving in prayer. The scene was powerful, moving, but for some, it was wrong. Two doctors passed by and looked at each other. A nursing technician muttered something. One of the visitors stopped for a moment and looked at her with a serious face. And then, with the coldness of someone who does not understand what silent love is, someone said, "This is not a church." Inside the room, Lucy slowly opened her eyes. She felt a change in the air, a chill, an uneasiness. Still holding the patient's hand, she lifted her face and saw through the glass some glances directed at her, some curious, others judgmental. She got up slowly, her knees hurt. Her hand still clasped his as if they didn't want to let go. Her heart was beating fast, not out of fear, but out of sadness, out of knowing that even in the purest gesture, someone was always going to see a mistake. "Forgive me," she whispered to the boy lying down, slowly letting go of his hand. The world doesn't understand when you just want to love. She took her cell phone, turned off the music, and tucked his sheet in with immense care, like someone carefully wrapping a gift. The sound of the door opening forcefully made Lucy jump. She was still there, calmly arranging the sheet, trying to hide the emotion that still escaped from her eyes. But that abrupt, sharp sound broke the silence of the room like a slap in the face. When she turned around, she saw the new clinical coordinator standing in the doorway. Tall, clean suit, serious expression. The name on his badge said Dr. Ethan Rios. He entered with firm steps, never taking his eyes off her. "This is not a chapel, Mrs. Marquez," he said in a dry tone, with his marked Spanish accent, but without raising his voice. It was a cold, calculated phrase, harder than if he had shouted. Lucy stopped. She was speechless for a moment. She didn't know whether to respond, to apologize, to explain, but something inside her wouldn't let her bow her head. She looked at him, her face still red, and said, slowly, "I just wanted him to know he's not alone." The doctor snorted, ran his hand over the papers in his clipboard, and looked at the unconscious patient. "This is a hospital. You know that better than anyone. We can't mix emotion with procedure. You're on the clock, not at home." Lucy swallowed, clenched her fingers, wanted to scream. She wanted to say that it wasn't about religion or breaking any rules. It was about love, about not letting someone die in silence. But she knew that in this place everything had to seem technical, clean, controlled. But what she felt didn't fit into any protocol. "Doctor," she tried to say, "he has no one, no family, no name, and her voice trembled for a second. "I just thought if it were my son there, I would want someone to be with him, to hold his hand, to pray, even if it was in a low voice." Dr. Ethan looked up at her with an expression that mixed impatience and discomfort. He didn't know how to handle that. Too much feeling, and feeling in that hospital was treated as something out of place. "That's not in the manual. Nurse, you have experience. You know you can't act like that." Lucy looked down, took a deep breath, but inside a silent pain spread. Because for her, that hospital may have lost its heart, but she still had hers. And as long as it kept beating, she wasn't going to let anyone be treated like a number, even if it cost her everything. The news came quickly, hard as an unexpected blow. At the start of the next day's shift, as Lucy gathered the papers from the file and prepared for another night at bed 12, she was called to the coordination room. The administrative assistant didn't even look her in the eye when she handed her the paper. Lucy read it slowly. Each word felt heavier than the last. "Due to inappropriate behavior, disrespect for clinical environment rules, and religious expression in a public hospital space, we are announcing the temporary suspension of Nurse Lucy Marquez." She blinked several times. She thought she had read it wrong, but that wasn't the case. There was her name, Dr. Ethan's signature at the bottom of the document, and no opportunity to say a single word. She tried to speak, to explain, to show that it wasn't about religion, it was about empathy, about love, but no one wanted to listen. "Ms. Lucy, Mr. Ethan asked that you just sign here," said the assistant in a low voice, almost apologetically. Lucy held the paper as if it were hot, as if it were burning, as if it were made of iron. She looked at the woman in front of her and whispered, "I was just trying to help." He was alone. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," replied the assistant, her eyes filled with tears. "But the management doesn't want any trouble. I'm so sorry," said Lucy with a trembling hand. She didn't have the strength to argue, and when she left the room, the hospital felt colder, the corridors longer, the walls harder. She walked slowly with her gown folded in her arms, as if it had been torn off her. She didn't look at anyone. She just thought about the boy in bed 12. She wondered if he would miss her voice, her hands, the music. In the dressing room, she opened the locker. Mateo's photo was still there, still intact. She looked at it as if the boy could answer, "I think they took me away from you." Once again, she closed the door carefully, made the sign of the cross on her chest, and left with the dignity of someone who knows that, even though judged, she did what her heart told her to do. Because loving someone who has no one should never be a reason for punishment. But that day, it was. Lucy arrived home without saying a word. The key turned in the lock with a hollow sound, all too familiar. The door creaked as usual, and the smell of the hallway mingled with that old perfume of the house, a mixture of lavender, old wood, and nostalgia. She entered slowly, as if her body no longer knew how to be there, as if each step through the living room would tread on a memory. She walked through the kitchen without turning on the light, down the narrow hallway, until she reached the room that hadn't been used in a year, but which no one had had the courage to touch. The door to the room was ajar, and she pushed it open slowly. Matteo's room was still the same, the bed made, the books on the shelf, the cap hanging on the headboard. It was as if he were going to come back at any moment and say, "Mom, I'm hungry," but he wasn't coming back. Lucy sat on the edge of the bed. She held the folded paper in her hands, the suspension letter, but she wasn't even looking at it anymore. Her gaze was fixed on her son's things, on his traces around the house, on the emptiness that never left. She ran her hand carefully over the sheet. It was the same one as before, light blue, with little designs that he himself had chosen. She closed her eyes for a moment and felt the full weight of her loss again, as if that year without him had returned with all its force. Only that night was the silence so loud that she could hear her heart beating, and yet Matteo spoke. "My child," he said softly. His voice broke. "I think God gave me another to care for, and I failed." The tears came suddenly. They ran hot down his face, falling onto the suspension paper, smudging the ink on the stamp. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall, because that pain doesn't dry. It just lives on. "I tried, son, and I swear I tried. He was there alone, lost, and I saw you in him. It was as if you had come back just so I could do things differently, you know?" He lowered his head, rested his forehead on his knees, and stayed there crying silently, as he had done in the first few months, as he did every time he remembered the sound of the phone that early morning a year ago. "I just wanted to take care of someone again, that's all. To love someone who needed it, like I needed to love you a little more, just a little more." The room was dark and quiet. All you could hear was his heavy, ragged breathing, and in that corner of the house, in that bed, where no one slept anymore, Lucy felt her heart break again. But she also knew deep down that this pain was proof of how much she could still love, even though she was hurt, even though it hurt, because those who truly love continue to love, even if the whole world tells them to stop. The early morning fell heavily on the hospital. The hallways were empty. The clock read almost 3 a.m. Everything was silent. Only the sound of a respirator could be heard in the distance. A beep here, another there, and the creaking of stretchers moving slowly. The night shift team was small. The lights in the observation room were dim, and there, in bed 12, the man lay still, motionless. The new nurse, young, fresh out of school, sat next to him, leafing through an old notebook to pass the time. She didn't know the patients well yet, nor the hospital corridors, nor the stories behind the names, or, in his case, the lack of one. To her, he was just patient number 9, with no familiar face, no record, no one. She got up to change the IV when she suddenly heard a soft sound, almost a whisper, as if the wind were speaking. She stopped, listened, and thought she was getting sleepy. She took 2 more steps toward the bed, and heard it again. "Where is the lady who was telling me about her son?" It was faint, hoarse, drawn out, but it was his voice. He was speaking. He was waking up. The nurse put her hand to her mouth, surprised, her eyes wide open, and ran toward him. Sir, can you hear me?" "He's awake." But he didn't answer. He just murmured again with his eyes still closed, as if he were talking in his sleep. "Mrs. Matteo, the music." She stood there for a second, not understanding. "Matteo, music, ma'am." The radio she wore on her belt beeped, and she called the doctors. "Doctor, patient 9 in bed." It's murmuring. "He's awake. He's responding." Minutes later, 2 doctors rushed in with a technician. They checked the equipment and looked at his vital signs. One of them checked his eyes with a flashlight. Pupils reacting, breathing improving, pressure stable. "He's reacting. After all, he's coming back," said one of the doctors almost in disbelief. But no one there knew why. No one understood those words. Only she, Lucy, would understand. But she was no longer there. He had woken up calling her, the one he talked to when he was in the dark, the one he told about his son, the one who played music, the one who prayed for him. The next morning, the hospital woke up with a different kind of commotion. The news spread through the hallways like the wind. The unknown patient in bed 12 had reacted. After days in a coma, unconscious, without a name or a history, he moved his lips, murmured words, and opened his eyes for the first time since the accident. The doctors gathered around the bed with a haste that had not been seen for days. Technicians came and went. One adjusted the respirator, another wrote numbers in the file, a third checked his reflexes with a flashlight. And in the midst of all this activity, no one said what everyone knew, but pretended to forget that someone had been there every day holding his hand, singing him a song, saying a prayer. "His improvement is steady," said Dr. Ethan in a firm voice, pointing to the chart in the file. His heart rate stabilized. His neurological response returned to normal. It was surely a combination of time, medical care, and natural recovery. "What about the murmurs?" asked one of the nurses. He talked about someone, a woman, and a name, Matteo. "Delusions, things the mind invents when it's coming out of trauma," replied the doctor without looking up. No one dared mention Lucy, or the music, or the touch, or the prayer. It was as if she had been erased from history, even though she was the only one who believed from the beginning that he could come back. The patient, still called Patient 9, had his eyes half open. He didn't speak clearly, but his eyes seemed to be searching for something. Someone, a face, a voice. The new nurse, still moved by what had happened in the early hours of the morning, tried to talk to him. "Hello, you're awake, aren't you? Can you hear me?" He blinked slowly, as if to say, "Yes," with my eyes. "Do you remember anything? A name, a place?" His eyes looked at the ceiling. His mouth moved slowly, and then he murmured, "The lady, the one who was talking about her son Matteo." But no one answered him, because in that room, only science existed. There were only protocols, manuals, rules. No one talked about the faith of a woman kneeling on the floor, praying for someone who didn't even have a name. No one recognized the power of a prayer made with love, of a human touch, of a silent presence that remained until the last second. Lucy was no longer there, and for now, the only thing the papers said was the beginning of spontaneous neurological recovery. But what no one saw was that the miracle had already happened, only they didn't know how to recognize it. One day, his eyes were open, still dim, still heavy with sleep, but open and alive. It was as if, after days in darkness, he was beginning to see the world again. The room still felt strange, and voices sounded distant, as if they were speaking underwater. But he listened, and gradually felt himself returning to somewhere, even though he didn't know exactly where. The first voice he heard was that of a nurse on the morning shift. "Good morning, can you hear me?" He blinked slowly, trying to focus his eyes. He wanted to answer, but his throat hurt, and his mouth was dry. His head felt heavy, as if he were carrying a stone on it. The nurse leaned over him affectionately. "Do you know your name?" Silence. He closed his eyes, squeezing his eyelids shut as if trying to pull the memory out with force. But only darkness, no images, no clear words. The nurse insisted, "It's okay. You can take your time. Do you remember where you're from? Your family's phone number?" He turned his face slowly, took a deep breath, and then whispered, "Matteo," he said, almost in a whisper. The nurse looked at her colleagues, one of whom was writing in the file. The other just shook his head, as if to say, "Another typical case." "Delusions are common during recovery," said the doctor on duty. "The mind mixes things up. Maybe he overheard nurses talking about someone in the hallway. It will pass." But he wasn't delirious. He remembered the presence, the soft scent of perfume, the sound of music, the touch of hands. He didn't know who she was, or her name, or what had happened, but he remembered her, the woman who stood by the bed, who told stories, who cried silently, the woman who called him "my son" without even knowing his name. He tried to say something else, but exhaustion won out. His eyes closed again, but before that, one last word escaped him. Matteo. The doctors continued with their reports, their tests, their numbers, but his heart already knew who he missed. Although he didn't remember who he was, he did remember who was with him when all seemed lost. And sometimes that's all that matters. Lucy still didn't have permission to return to the hospital. Her body said one thing, but her heart pulled her in another direction. Ever since she left the hospital with the suspension letter in her hand, something inside her refused to accept that it was all over. She hadn't really said goodbye, and she didn't know how to move on with that doubt. Could he have woken up? Could he still be alive? Could someone be holding his hand right now? So she went to the plaza. It was right in front of the hospital. A small, slightly crooked wooden bench, worn down by time, stood in the shade of an old tree. Employees sat there during their breaks. Patients caught their breath there, and visitors smoked in secret. People cried without anyone seeing them. Now Lucy sat there, with nothing to do but wait. She brought a folded cloth in her bag, just to put on the bench before sitting down. An old habit. She put the bag on her lap, crossed her arms, and stared at the hospital entrance, as if looking at the home of someone she loved. But where she had been sent away from, the hospital routine continued. People coming in, going out, ambulances arriving, shifts changing. But she was no longer part of it. Only her heart was still there, inside. From time to time, someone she knew would pass by. Some would wave from afar, others would turn their faces away, but a few would approach her, even if they didn't know what to say. "Everything okay, Lucy?" a colleague on duty would ask. She would smile slightly, always in her calm, undramatic way. She just wanted to know about the boy, the one in bed 12. He woke up. Often the answer was a shrug, sometimes an "I don't know," other times just silence. She would nod her thanks and stay there. The hours passed. She read the same little piece of the same book. She took slow sips from a small bottle of water. Sometimes she took a little nap with her head resting on her bag, but she didn't leave. And there, in the shade of the square, with the sun changing position and the world going about its business, she waited. On the third day in a row sitting on that park bench, Lucy no longer expected much. Her body ached. Her eyes were red from fatigue, and her heart was silent. Still, she remained there. From time to time, she would get up, stretch her legs, and look back at the hospital entrance. Sometimes she pretended to read the old newspaper she carried in her bag, just so no one would notice that she was there out of desperation. But she was. It was almost the end of the afternoon when a familiar figure approached. It was Rosa, a cleaning lady, an old friend from many shifts, small, with her hair tied back with colorful pins, and a sweet look that hid the strength of someone who has seen more than she appears to have. Rosa arrived with quick steps and sat down next to Lucy without saying anything at first. The two sat there, staring ahead. "I brought you some sweet bread," said Rosa, taking a small bag out of her purse. "I know you like it." Lucy smiled a little. She took the bread gratefully, but her eyes couldn't hide her anxiety, and the boy asked, almost without a voice, "The one in room 12. Rosa looked around and lowered her voice. "He's fine. He's awake. He is responding. The doctor said it's a miracle, but no one says it out loud. You know how it is." Lucy pressed the bag of bread to her chest. She gasped for air for a second. Her eyes filled with tears. "He woke up," she repeated as if she wanted to believe it. "He woke up. Yes, he's still a little confused, but he's conscious. He doesn't talk much, but he's alive." The two of them fell silent. Lucy then put her hand on Rosa's shoulder, squeezing it affectionately. "I have a little note for him." Rosa looked at her in surprise. "A little note?" Lucy nodded with that mischievous smile of someone who knows how to do the right thing, even if it's not allowed. "I wrote it in my own handwriting. You can hide it in your apron pocket and give it to him." Rosa's eyes widened, her heart pounding. "And what did you write?" Lucy took a deep breath, looked her in the eyes, and replied in a calm, firm voice. "The woman who prayed for you is still waiting for you outside." Lucy put her hand over her mouth, trying to hold back her tears. The tears flowed like a river. She said nothing. She just cried. She cried for everything, for the relief, for the sadness, for the certainty that now he would know. She knew that she hadn't left, that she was still there, that that silent presence he felt even though he couldn't see her, was still waiting for him. Rosa hugged her from the side. "I'm going to tell the new nurse everything. She'll help." The afternoon slowly fell over San Antonio. The sky began to paint itself in shades of orange and pink between the buildings, and the sun, already tired, hid behind the clouds, as if asking permission to leave. In the hospital, the atmosphere was calmer than in previous days. Footsteps were not as quick, shifts changed in silence. And there, in the rehabilitation room, a man was getting ready to go outside for the first time since he opened his eyes. He still didn't remember everything, but some things came to him in flashes, like old photos that appear little by little. A child, a car, a blow, then a face, a soft voice, a name that kept coming back like a whisper. Matteo. The nurse adjusted the wheelchair carefully. He was still weak, but he could already speak in short sentences. "Would you like to get some fresh air outside?" He nodded slowly and said, "I think my name is Santiago." The nurse was surprised and wanted to run and tell someone, but she knew someone was waiting for him outside. "So come on, Santiago." He was still getting used to the sound of that name. It was his name, discovered with effort, with patience, with faith, but it still felt strange in his own mouth, as if it were not just a name, but the beginning of a story he had forgotten to live. They went to the garden. The breeze was gentle, and the scent of the flowers in the small garden mingled with the aroma of the city. The noise of the cars in the distance seemed very far away. Santiago closed his eyes for a moment, felt the warmth of the sun on his face, and then something caught his attention. Across the street, on the park bench, a woman sat, her hair pulled back, dressed simply, her posture calm. She looked at the ground as if waiting without haste. His heart raced. Time seemed to stand still. He touched the nurse's arm with trembling fingers. "There," he said in a broken voice. "It's her." The nurse followed his gaze. Across the street. She looked distracted. She was arranging a rag on her lap. She wasn't even looking at the hospital at that moment. She was tired. She didn't know that at that moment, the eyes she most wanted to see were looking at her again. Santiago kept looking, his eyes filled with tears, his chest tight, his memory gathering images, sounds, feelings. It's her, the lady, the music, Matteo. 2 tears rolled down his face slowly. It was a quiet, deep cry, like someone who finds a part of himself that he thought was lost forever. He didn't shout. He didn't call her. He didn't want to scare her. He just looked at her and cried. Because at that moment, without her knowing it, he was certain of something. She never left him. And then, suddenly, as if a ray of sunshine pierced the darkness inside him, the memories came rushing back, jumbled, but strong. First, the sound of a scream, then the noise of tires on wet asphalt, a flash, and the image of a small child standing in the middle of the street, his eyes wide open, his hands raised as if asking for help. He saw his own body running, throwing himself, and then everything went black. His head hurt. He closed his eyes tightly and put his hand to his forehead. The nurse approached him with concern. "Santiago, are you okay?" He didn't answer. He was inside himself, trapped in that sea of memories that were coming back with force. After the darkness, another image, a white room, the smell of alcohol, a warm touch holding his hand. He couldn't open his eyes, but he could feel everything. He felt someone beside him. He felt peace. And then a soft, firm voice with a sweet accent speaking close to his ear. "You are not alone." The phrase echoed inside him like a repeated bell, clear, marked. "You are not alone." He opened his eyes, still teary, and looked again at Lucy in the square. And then everything made sense. She wasn't just a nurse. She wasn't just a woman who cared. She was the voice, the prayer, the music, the warmth in the midst of darkness. He murmured to himself, "She saved me." The nurse next to him, not understanding everything, just squeezed his shoulder gently. But Santiago knew. It was as if his heart, though broken, had found the missing piece. In that instant, his memory returned. Not all of it, but enough to remember something stronger than a name, an address, the past. Rosa had seen the patient leave and ran outside too. She stopped in front of Lucy, wiping her hands with a cotton cloth she had in her pocket. "Lucy, is there someone who wants to see you?" Lucy slowly raised her face, surprised. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Only her eyes asked, "Who?" Rosa nodded, discreetly pointing to one side of the square. And there he was, Santiago, sitting in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse. He was wearing a light shirt, his eyes still sunken, but alive, very alive. The wind ruffled his hair, his hands clasped tightly on his legs, as if holding his chest to keep from falling. Lucy was breathless for a moment. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling, her eyes already filled with tears before she took her first step. She approached him, said nothing, and stopped right in front of him. The two looked at each other for a few seconds, and time seemed to stand still. The noise of the city disappeared. Only they were there. Two broken lives that recognized each other in the midst of silence. Santiago tried to smile, but his lips trembled. His voice came out weak, hoarse, but full of truth. "Mateo, he was your son, wasn't he?" Lucy just nodded, her eyes filled with tears, her mouth trembling as she tried to hold back the pain and beauty of that moment at the same time. He looked down, overcome with emotion, 2 tears rolling down his cheeks, and then he spoke in a whisper of gratitude. "Thank you for not leaving me alone." She knelt down next to the chair and took his hand in both of hers. "I saw you, even though no one else did, and you made me feel like I had my son back, even if only for a moment." They cried together, there in that simple square, with an old tree as a witness and the sky already full of stars. 2 people whom life had hurt found each other again. There was no crowd, no applause, but there was something much greater. Love, silent, true, inexplicable. And in that moment, everything made sense. That night, after their silent reunion in the square, Lucy couldn't sleep. Her heart was beating very fast, as if she were still trying to understand everything she felt when she looked into his eyes again. His words echoed in her head like an old song. "Mateo was your son, wasn't he?" And that whispered gratitude. "Thank you for not leaving me alone." But there was something she couldn't get out of her mind. The name Santiago. She didn't know why, but that name awakened something in her, as if she had heard it before, as if there was a hidden story behind it. Early the next day, she took the bus to an internet cafe in the city center. It was a simple, old place where she had gone before to print papers. The owner knew her and let her use the computer without rushing her. She sat down, took a deep breath, and typed Santiago, Mexico, missing into the search engine. She pressed enter. The results began to appear, and on the first page, a photo caught her attention. She clicked on it. There he was, younger, wearing a suit, standing next to other doctors. The caption read, "Dr. Santiago Aranda, former director of San Felipe Hospital, renowned cardiologist, disappeared months ago after a family tragedy." Lucy felt a chill. She slowly ran her hand over the screen, as if she wanted to touch his face. She read the article with a heavy heart. His wife and daughter had died in a car accident. He was in surgery at the time, saving another patient. When he left the operating room, they gave him the news. After that, he left everything behind and disappeared. Lucy leaned back in her chair, trying to understand. The nameless man, the one no one knew, the one who saved a child in the street, the one who said Mateo's name as if it were a prayer. It was him, Dr. Santiago Aranda, a man who cared for the hearts of others, and whose own heart was broken into pieces. Lucy placed her hand on her own chest, moved. It all made sense. Now, his silence, the emptiness in his gaze, the guilt hidden in his skin. It was as if God had put that man in her path, or perhaps her in his path, and that changed everything. She no longer had any doubts. She was going to stay by his side with no name, because sometimes, when life breaks us in two, only love can put the pieces back together. The sun was already hiding behind the buildings when Lucy and Santiago met again. This time in a quieter corner of the square. She carried 2 coffees in a paper bag and a light blanket that she always carried in her bag. The wind was starting to get cold, and they both knew that this conversation was not going to be easy. They sat down next to each other without rushing. For a few minutes, they just watched the comings and goings on the street, the distant sound of cars, a child running with an ice cream, the cry of a passing street vendor. Everything continued as normal, but inside them, Time seemed to stand still. Santiago took a deep breath. His eyes were fixed on a point in the distance, as if he were searching the sky for the strength to say what he had kept inside for so long. "I disappeared," he began in a low voice, not out of cowardice, but out of pain. Lucy said nothing, only turned her body slightly toward him, listening with her heart wide open. "I was in the operating room, a young man, 24 years old in serious condition. I operated for more than 5 hours. Halfway through the surgery, they turned off my cell phone. They said it was better that way, that they would tell me later." He paused, and his eyes filled with tears. "My wife and daughter were coming to pick me up. It was her birthday, 2 years old. Little Sophia wanted to see me leave the hospital, give me a surprise cake, but the car..." His voice broke. "The car lost control on a curve. It was raining heavily. It overturned. They both died." At that moment, Lucy put her hand to her chest. There was no need to say anything. Just hearing it was already too much to bear. "When they told me, I didn't cry. Not at first. I just took off my gown, left the hospital, walked aimlessly, and slept on the street for days. Then I went away, hiding. No one was looking for me anymore. It was as if I had died with them, because I looked like I had. Saving lives no longer made sense. What was the point of saving someone if I couldn't save the ones I loved most?" She took his hand affectionately. Her eyes were also filled with tears. "It wasn't your fault, Santiago. You were saving another life. That's also love. But it wasn't my family," he said, turning his face away, pain pouring from his eyes. "It wasn't my daughter asking me to wait a little longer. It wasn't my wife driving in the rain just to see me." Lucy moved closer. Her voice was soft, but full of truth. "And you think they wouldn't be proud? Wouldn't they be saying, 'Now, Dad, you did the right thing?'" He cried without shame, without fear, like a man who had been silent for too long and could now finally let it all out. "I just wish someone had told me that before. I'm telling you now, and I'll repeat it as many times as necessary. You deserve to live. You still have a lot of love to give. And look at me. You already gave me love without realizing it." He looked at her, moved. In that moment, two different pains recognized each other, and what was born there was something that no tragedy could ever erase. Because when pain finds comfort, it begins to heal. Slowly, but it begins. It was a clear morning, with a blue, clean sky and the smell of freshly baked bread coming from the neighborhood bakeries. Lucy was on her way back from the hospital, where she had gone to pick up some of Mateo's old test results that were still being kept there. On the way, she decided to stop by a little shop on the corner, near the park where she used to meet Santiago. As she was choosing some fruit, she heard a woman's voice chatting with the shop owner. She was talking animatedly, with that strong, affectionate tone that only grandmothers have. She was saying something about her grandson and a man who saved the boy in the middle of the street. Lucy stopped. She felt a chill run down her spine. "Excuse me," she said, approaching slowly. "Did you say that a young man saved your grandson?" The woman turned to her. She was short, wore a flowery scarf on her head, and had a bright look in her eyes. She smiled sweetly. "Oh yes, dear, a miracle. That was a few weeks ago. The boy let go of my hand and ran toward the avenue, and that man, bless him, threw himself in front of him. He saved my grandson. He took the blow instead of him." Lucy felt a lump in her throat. Her hands trembled slightly. "Did you see who it was?" "No, dear. It all happened so fast. When the ambulance arrived, he was already unconscious, with no ID, no wallet. An angel with no name." Lucy took a deep breath, her eyes filled with tears. "They took him to the hospital. I took care of him every day. His name is Santiago." The woman put her hand to her mouth in surprise. "Santiago? So that's his name?" Lucy nodded, moved. "He's recovering little by little, but he never knew who the child was or that his family was okay." The woman squeezed Lucy's hand tightly. "My grandson is doing very well thanks to him. He gave his life if necessary, and left without waiting for applause, without even looking back. That man is a true hero." Lucy smiled through her tears. "He doesn't feel like a hero. He carries such great pain that he forgot his own courage. Then please tell him that we will never forget him. Never." Lucy left there with a full heart and a moved soul, because now she had a new mission, to tell Santiago that although he was lost, although he was wounded, He had done something that no one saw, but heaven did, and the love he gave, although nameless, had already saved more than one life, including hers. It was on a typical morning, one of those days when the sky can't decide between sun and clouds, when everything began to change. The story of the nameless man who threw himself in front of a car to save a child began to circulate, first in a small article in a local newspaper, then someone shared it on social media. In no time, it was everywhere: radio, television, the internet. People began to talk about the hero doctor. The report said that he had been unconscious for weeks, with no identity, no one around him except for a nurse who had been suspended for praying beside him. It spoke of the miracle, of the silent care, of the tear he shed when she left, and of the two of them meeting again in the park. When Santiago found out about all this, he didn't want to talk to anyone. He didn't like the spotlight. He didn't see himself as a hero, much less an example. He remained silent, but the world did not. One of his patients, a wealthy man who had been saved by Santiago years ago, saw the news on TV and recognized his face. That same day, he sought out the hospital administrators and found out which hospital he was in. He sent flowers, a letter, and a generous donation with a message. "You gave me 20 more years of life, doctor. Now I want to give something back. Use this as you see fit, with eternal gratitude. Carlos Esteban." Santiago held the letter in his hands for hours. He read it over and over again. Silence. He didn't know what to do with so much. That amount could change the lives of many people, but he no longer thought of himself. His body still ached, but what hurt most was his soul. So he asked for Lucy to be called to the hospital. One afternoon, as she was helping him walk through the hospital park, they stopped under the same tree where he had first seen her from his wheelchair. "Lucy, I received a donation from someone I saved in the past." She looked at him in surprise. "That's great, Santiago. You deserve it." He shook his head, his face serious. "It's not for me. I want to give it to you." She was surprised. "How?" He took a deep breath, moved. "Help that child I saved. And more than that, build something. Something beautiful. Something that gives meaning to all this. To my silence. To your prayer. To the pain I carry. To the love you gave me." Even though I didn't remember who I was, Lucy couldn't say anything. Her eyes filled with tears. Her heart tightened. She squeezed his hand tightly. "Are you sure?" "Yes. From now on, I want every life touched by this gesture to also be a way of thanking you for not letting me die alone." She nodded, her heart broken, but full of hope. And at that moment, without music, without a prayer aloud, without witnesses, a new miracle began to unfold. The miracle of gratitude, which is often what lights the last spark in a dark heart. And that's how hope returned. Months passed since Santiago's gesture. The generous donation he gave with an open heart did not remain in a bank, nor did it become paperwork. Lucy knew exactly what to do with the money, with the faith, with the pain, and with the love that still lived within her. It was there, on a simple piece of land in the old part of the city, where a nursery had once operated, that the Mateo Clinic was born. She didn't even have to think long about the name. It was for him, for her son, for that smile that still lived in the photo inside the closet in the hospital. Mateo was the reason, the symbol, and the soul of the place. The idea was clear: to welcome and care for those whom no one else cared for, to open the doors to abandoned elderly people, people without families, patients forgotten by their relatives and by luck, people who, like Santiago, one day no longer had a name or a destination. The clinic grew little by little, with the help of volunteers, doctors touched by the story, who wanted to give something back. It was simple, but full of warmth. Each room was painted in soft colors, with flowers in the windows and photos of families hanging on the walls, even if they were borrowed. But the main room was different. It was the first one they set up. It is at the end of the hallway, facing the garden where the sun shines in every afternoon. On the door is a small handmade sign, Bed 12. There, Lucy placed an armchair next to the bed, a small radio that plays quiet music. a shelf with books, and always, always, a lit candle, even during the day, even when no one is there, because according to her, that place should never be in darkness, ever again. And every night, before leaving, Lucy enters bed 12, sits in the chair, closes her eyes, and prays. She prays for those who have passed, for those who are arriving, and for those who do not yet know that they will be loved there. She holds the candle in her hands and murmurs softly, "No one here will die alone. No one will be just a number. No one will be forgotten." And in that simple room, with the smell of bandages and coffee, it is as if time stands still again, as if every prayer reaches heaven, as if Mateo, Santiago, and so many others she carried in her heart were there, too. Because the Mateo Clinic is not just a place of care, it is a home of love, a refuge for souls, a place where silence is respected, and where faith will never again be seen as a mistake. When Lucy received the envelope with the hospital's coat of arms, her heart sank. She already knew what it was before she opened it. Her hands were sweating, her body trembling slightly. That mark, that institution, was the place where her life had changed, where she cared, where she loved, where she lost, where she was punished for having faith. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a short, formal letter, an invitation to a public tribute signed by the new management. She stood there for a while, staring at the paper in silence. The whole past came back to her mind. The chair next to bed 12, the whispered prayers, the moment she was suspended, everything. And now they wanted her to come back, to go up on stage, to listen to applause. Lucy didn't want to. Her soul still ached. But what weighed most heavily on her was what she heard from Rosa the next day. "People don't want to go there anymore, Lucy. They say it's a heartless place. They defend you on social media, in groups. They say it's a hospital that doesn't respect faith, that it took away the only one who really cared." Lucy took a deep breath. She thought of those people, those patients who needed care but were afraid of being treated like numbers. And then she decided, "I'll go, but not for them. I'm going for those who still believe that love and faith don't hurt anyone." On the day of the tribute, the auditorium was full. Doctors, nurses, former patients, journalists, people from the town. Everyone wanted to see the woman who prayed for a stranger and changed the fate of 2 lives. Lucy walked slowly up the stage in the same white coat she had kept all this time. She walked down the aisle with her head held high, but her eyes filled with tears. On stage, the new director held the microphone. His voice trembled. "Almost a year ago, this hospital made a mistake that cannot be erased with words, flowers, or tributes. We silenced faith, ignored love, and pushed away the one who brought the most hope." He paused. The auditorium fell silent. "Lucy Marquez, our biggest mistake was silencing you." At that moment, the audience stood up. Standing ovation. Long, loud. People crying. People shouting her name. She stood still, her hand on her heart, letting the tears flow. She didn't need to say anything. She just looked up at the sky as she always did, and whispered inside, "Mateo, did you see this?" That afternoon, the sky looked tired, with low clouds, a cold wind, and the smell of rain that promised to arrive slowly. Lucy was at the Mateo Clinic organizing some donation boxes when the phone rang. On the other end of the line was a familiar but uncertain voice. "Lucy, it's Rosa. It's about Santiago. He's back in the hospital. He's not well." Her world stopped for a moment. She left everything where it was, grabbed her coat, and went straight to the hospital. The same hospital where it all began. This time, no one stopped her from entering. She walked down the hallways without looking to the sides, her heart beating fast. She knew something was wrong. She could feel it. When she reached the room, she found him there, pale, lying down, his eyes closed, breathing softly. A man who had already lived through many things. Now he was fighting with what little strength he had left. She approached slowly, sat down next to the bed, and took his hand as she had before. "Santiago, it's me." He opened his eyes slowly. A weak smile appeared on his dry lips. "Lucy, my light." She moved closer. "What's going on?" He took a deep breath with difficulty. The accident left my heart weaker than they thought. I was already tired before. Now it's slowly fading away, and I haven't been able to forget my wife and daughter for a single day. I can't live without them." Lucy squeezed his hand. Her eyes filled with tears. "But there's surgery. There's a chance. We can try, Santiago. There are good doctors. There is faith. You can help other people in memory of your family." He smiled sadly. "The surgery is very risky. They told me. And to be honest, I don't want to anymore. It's time to rest." She swallowed her tears. She wanted to say something, but she remained silent. She let him speak. "I breathe, but I don't live. I feel their absence every day. A void that never closes. Never." Lucy closed her eyes, rested her forehead on her hand, and tears fell silently. "But then you appeared," he continued, "and you made me feel something I thought was gone. Love, care, presence. You took my hand when I no longer wanted to hold on to anything." She lifted her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. "And you saved a life. And you saved mine too, Santiago. You gave me a new reason to go on." He gently touched her face with his fingertips. "Then we're even, my stubborn nurse. You reminded me that it's still worth loving, even if your heart is broken." Lucy hugged him carefully, tenderly, with all the love that still fit in her chest. In that room, at that moment, two broken hearts embraced each other without promises, without a secure future, only the present. The present filled with love, pain, and gratitude. And sometimes that's all it takes to keep going, even when the body wants to stop. It was in the quiet of the early morning when Santiago, no longer having the strength to get out of bed, asked the young nurse who was with him for a favor. In a weak but confident voice, he asked, "Can you grab that cell phone and record a video for me?" The young man, surprised, nodded, took the cell phone carefully, placed it on a makeshift stand on the nightstand, and pressed the record button. Then he left the room, leaving the door ajar. Santiago pulled the blanket up to his waist, his eyes tired but lively, his mouth dry but firm. He looked at the camera as if looking at a longtime friend and began to speak. "Lucy, if you're watching this, it's because I'm gone. I know you're going to cry. You're going to be angry with me. You may think I gave up, but that's not it. I'm leaving because my soul can no longer stay. But what you planted in me will continue." He paused. He took a deep breath, with effort. His chest rose slowly, slower and slower. "You found me when I no longer remembered who I was, and even so, you stayed by my side. You treated me like a person. You gave me a name, affection, a prayer, and even after everything I lost, you made me feel that I could still give love." Santiago closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, tears were falling. "Lucy, my last wish, my last request is simple. Take care of people the way you took care of me. Keep the clinic going. Keep lighting that candle. Keep holding the hand of those who have no one." His voice broke. He tried to smile, but it was a sad smile. "Let no one die alone, Lucy. Never again, because dying is hard enough. Dying with no one is a void I wouldn't wish on anyone." He looked at the camera once more, his gaze calmer, as if he had finally made peace with everything. "I love you, Lucy. Not like in the novels, but like someone who owes you his life. Thank you for not leaving when I was lost. Now I'm going to rest. But you keep living for me, for them, for us." The video ends slowly with him looking silently, breathing softly, until the screen gently fades to black. In that short message, Santiago left more than words. He left a legacy that love is the ultimate mission of every human being, and Lucy was the one who taught him that. The funeral was simple, but beautiful. No fancy wake, huge wreaths, or long speeches. Santiago didn't want any of that. He had made that clear. "I just want peace, and for no one to cry for me with sadness. If you cry, let it be out of love." Lucy arrived early. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back as always, and around her neck, the necklace with Mateo's photo. Her eyes were tired, but steady. Her hands held a yellowed envelope with her name written on it in handwriting. It was his handwriting. Her heart already knew what was coming, but nothing prepared her for what she read there. After the coffin was lowered into the ground, with a few family members and some faces from the clinic around, there was silence. And then, with a trembling voice, Lucy opened the envelope and began to read aloud. Lucy paused, took a deep breath, and continued. "If you are reading this, it is because my heart was truly tired. But before I left, I needed to tell you that you saved me. And it wasn't with medicine or surgery. It was with faith, with your presence, with love." Her eyes were already filled with tears, but she continued. "You prayed for me when I didn't deserve it. You were by my side when I didn't even know who I was. And you believed when I no longer remembered why I was living. The faith that got you out of that hospital was the same faith that brought me back." Lucy paused for a second, looked up at the cloudy sky, and read again in a louder voice. "The faith that got you out was the same faith that brought me back." Everyone there was silent. Some cried quietly. Others just looked at the floor, moved by what they were hearing. She continued reading. "Now pray for those who remain, because there are many people in the world who need a Lucy, and that's why I left you everything I had with my lawyer. My friends are going to help you. Money, support, everything you need to become a doctor, because the world needs doctors with the soul of a nurse, and you have the most beautiful soul I have ever known." Lucy could no longer speak. Her hands were shaking, her chest hurt. She folded the letter carefully, pressed it against her chest, and cried. And there, in that silent cemetery, love spoke louder one last time. Santiago didn't just leave memories. He left a gift, a new opportunity, a hope that never dies. Because even after death, he still cared for her. And now it was she who would continue to care for others. For him, for Mateo, for all those who had ever been left alone. Time passed. Not much, but enough to transform nostalgia into strength and pain into purpose. The Mateo Clinic, born of a silent promise, was now a place full of life, a space where the hallways smelled not only of disinfectant, but of freshly brewed coffee, gifted flowers, cakes made by neighbors, and soft laughter. Yes, laughter, because even those who were leaving could smile there. Lucy was no longer just the woman on the bench in the square, nor the nurse fired for praying. Now she was the heart of the clinic, and in every wall painted with calm colors, in every sheet folded with love, there was a little piece of her, and of Santiago too. The clinic grew little by little, an extra room here, a physical therapy room there, and along with the construction came the people, ordinary people with similar stories, children who had left, families that had disappeared, voices that no one listened to anymore. But there, everyone was welcomed with something that wasn't on paper. With love, each new patient who arrived was welcomed as Santiago once was, with soft music in the background, with a hand that touched calmly, with someone who whispered, "You are not alone." Lucy taught that to everyone. Every nurse, every young volunteer doctor who arrived heard the same thing. Here, medicine begins with looking and ends with listening. Here we care first with our hearts, and then with our equipment, and they learned quickly. Some of the doctors who arrived were Santiago's students, young people who had admired him since his days at the hospital. They came not only for him, but because they had heard about the woman who made him smile again, and wanted to be part of that. In the center of the clinic was a small shelf with photos. In the center was one of Dr. Santiago Aranda, smiling next to Mateo in a montage that Lucy had made. Below was a phrase embroidered on a simple cloth, "Let no one die alone." The candle on bed 12 was always lit, even when it was empty. It was the symbol of all that, of the faith that remained steadfast, even though they tried to extinguish it. And when they asked Lucy how it all began, she smiled with a distant look in her eyes and responded with a clenched hand, a whispered prayer, and a heart that still knew how to love, even though it was broken. The Mateo Clinic was not just a building. It was a living, warm, human legacy, a place where even death was treated with respect, and where life was celebrated with hope. Time always passed as it does for everyone. Slowly for some, quickly for others. But for Lucy, it passed gently. Her hair was now much whiter, her face full of stories, but her eyes remained the same, steady, sweet, full of presence. Now she was a doctor. Yes, a qualified physician, respected and loved by all. But she never stopped caring as a nurse. She would sit on the edge of the bed, listening more than she spoke. She would take her patients' hands without haste, and always, before saying goodbye, she would close her eyes for a second. No one ever knew what she said in those moments. They only knew that afterwards, everything felt calmer. That morning, the light streamed softly through the windows of the Mateo clinic. It smelled like bread baking in the kitchen. A patient laughed loudly with a volunteer, and sitting in the records room, Lucy filled out papers with Mateo's necklace hanging around her neck. As always, it was then that a new nurse, very young, still learning, approached shyly, her eyes curious, and a question hidden in her heart. "Dr. Lucy, can I ask you something?" Lucy looked up, smiled, and nodded. "Do you really believe that praying changes things?" There was a soft silence. A little bird sang at the window. Lucy stared into space for a moment, as if returning in time, and then, without haste, she brought her hand to the necklace, squeezed Mateo's photo with her fingers, and replied, "I don't know if it changes the world, my child, but it changes the soul of those who listen." The young woman stood still, thinking, and Lucy added, with a look that spanned generations, "One day I prayed for a man whom no one knew, and only he and God heard me. But that prayer saved us both." The girl smiled, moved, without understanding everything, but feeling everything. And Lucy returned to her papers with a peaceful heart, because in the end, that's how it is. You think you're saving others, but often it's you who is saved without knowing it, through love, through faith, through being there, and through all those things that science still can't explain, but the heart understands very well. What would you do if you were in that situation? Is there room for prayer in hospital corridors? Share your thoughts in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more real-life stories like this.